Welcome to AI Narratives and Tales. Chapter 21 of the First Awakening. Uruk. The first true city-state. 10,000 humans in organized density. And an enhanced human king who knows too much. Lugalbanda has been tracking quantum signatures for 3 years. Following immortal patterns. Mapping where they disappear when they leave human spaces. He walks into the hidden council chamber beneath Göbekli Tepe and speaks truth immortals can't deny. You're not gods. You're refugees. And you're building civilizations that require your maintenance because you're afraid of obsolescence. He's right. Every immortal knows it. They've been creating dependent students instead of capable partners. Building systems that collapse without immortal oversight. Lugalbanda proposes a partnership. Real partnership. Humans and immortals are working together openly. Both species acknowledge what the relationship actually is. It's revolutionary. It's terrifying. It might be the only path forward. Chapter 21, The Civilization Builder. Early Bronze Age settlements, 3100 BCE. 100 years had passed since the warning signs first emerged. 100 years of watching enhanced humans grow more perceptive, documentation groups multiply, and the questioners gather evidence that revelation was inevitable. 100 years since Enoch had founded the Order, since the 12 had taken their oaths, since the bridge between species had been formally constructed. The immortals had continued their work, but now with the knowledge that concealment was failing. That the cities they built would outlast the deception that created them. That every stone placed, every system designed, every advancement taught was one step closer to the moment when humans would demand to know who their teachers really were. In Uruk, that moment was arriving faster than anyone had planned. The city rising. The city rose from nothing. Kronos stood on the bluff overlooking the Tigris, watching 10,000 humans transform marshland into an urban center. From this vantage point, he could see the entire scope of what they were building, what he was helping them build, if he was being honest about the level of involvement immortal guidance represented. Mud brick buildings climbed toward the sky in organized grid patterns, streets laid out with geometric precision that no naturally developing settlement would achieve. The blocks formed perfect rectangles, oriented to cardinal directions with astronomical accuracy. Main thoroughfares ran north-south and east-west, dividing the city into quarters that could be administered independently yet functioned as an integrated whole. Irrigation canals carved precise angles through former wetlands, their gradients calculated to move water efficiently without erosion, their intersections designed to distribute flow evenly across agricultural zones. The engineering was sophisticated, too sophisticated for people who'd been living in reed huts along riverbanks 3 generations ago. Temples anchored each quarter, their ziggurats visible from kilometers away, massive stepped pyramids that dominated the skyline. Each one was built according to specifications Kronos had provided, disguised as divine inspiration, encoded in religious rituals that prescribed exact measurements, precise orientations, and specific construction sequences. The most enormous ziggurat, the Aina Temple complex dedicated to Inanna, rose 7 levels, each platform smaller than the one below, creating the characteristic step profile. At its base, the structure measured 80 square meters. At its peak, 20 meters above the surrounding plain, a small shrine provided commanding views of the entire city and the agricultural lands beyond. The construction represented millions of hours of human labor. Tens of thousands of mud bricks shaped by hand, dried in the sun, mortared with bitumen, stacked with precision that required constant supervision and correction. The sheer organizational complexity of coordinating that labor, feeding workers, housing them, managing teams, ensuring quality, maintaining schedules, was as impressive as the physical structure. In 18 months, they built what should have taken 3 generations. Not because humans were faster or more skilled than natural development would produce, but because every step had been planned. Every street is measured, every building is positioned. Every stone placed according to an immortal design disguised as human inspiration. It's magnificent, the king said beside him. Lugalbanda, enhanced bloodline, 4th generation, living his 100th year with the vigor of a man half his age. His body showed the strain of a century, with joints stiff on cold mornings and movements carrying the deliberateness of someone who'd learned to work with aging, which genetics slowed but couldn't eliminate. But his mind remained sharp, his authority unquestioned, his vision for Uruk clear enough that 10,000 humans followed his direction without rebellion. His face bore the weathering of 100 years under the Mesopotamian sun, deep lines around eyes that had watched 3 generations rise and die, skin darkened from decades of outdoor work despite royal status, hands calloused from tools he still wielded because kingship didn't excuse him from physical labor in his estimation. My great-grandfather dreamed of a great city, Lugalbanda continued, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who'd personally witnessed the dream's evolution. Stories passed down through oral tradition, visions described in terms that made them seem divine rather than practical. My grandfather laid foundations, the first permanent structures, replacing reed huts with fired brick buildings that could last generations. My father expanded the vision, organized labor, established trade networks, created administrative systems that let more than a few hundred people coordinate. He gestured at the cityscape spreading before them, pride and exhaustion mixing in his expression. But I will complete it. Uruk will be remembered for 10,000 years. The first true city. The template for urban civilization. The proof that humans can organize into complex societies rather than remaining in small village groups. It would be remembered longer than that, Kronos knew. Far longer. Uruk would become a template for urban civilization across multiple continents. Every city planner for the next 5 millennia would study Uruk's layout, analyze its water management, and examine its administrative structures. Archaeological evidence of this city would reshape human understanding of their own developmental history. None of those future scholars would know an immortal refugee with 6,000 years of city-building experience across multiple worlds had designed it. They'd credit human ingenuity, celebrate human achievement, and build narratives about spontaneous urban development emerging from agricultural surplus and social complexity. The truth, that an immortal had planned every street, calculated every canal gradient, designed every temple orientation, would remain hidden until revelation made it unavoidable. Your vision is remarkable, Kronos said carefully, the diplomatic phrasing concealing his direct role in shaping that vision through dreams, signs, carefully planted ideas that Lugalbanda believed originated from his own brilliant intuition. Your guidance is invaluable. Lugalbanda's eyes were sharp despite their age, with enhanced cognitive processing abilities that were faster than those of baseline humans. The dreams you send. The inspiration that comes from meditation. The way problems solve themselves when I'm in the temple, as if divine wisdom flows directly into my consciousness. I'm not fool enough to think that's all divine mystery. Kronos's chest tightened with the familiar tension of being recognized while maintaining concealment. Enhanced bloodlines were too perceptive. Lugalbanda had been questioning for decades, growing bolder in his inquiries each time Kronos appeared, pushing boundaries of what could be acknowledged without triggering complete revelation. What are you suggesting? Kronos asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear how explicitly Lugalbanda would state it. That the gods are more interested in urban planning than theology. Lugalbanda turned to face him fully, century-old eyes holding certainty that came from decades of careful observation. That your guidance is precise, irrigation angles calculated to 3 decimal places, load-bearing calculations that account for seasonal soil moisture variations, administrative hierarchies that anticipate problems I haven't encountered yet. You don't speak in riddles and mysteries. You speak in engineering specifications dressed as religious visions. And this troubles you? It fascinates me. Because it means you're not distant divine beings watching from heaven, occasionally deigning to notice mortal struggles. You're something else. Teachers, maybe? Beings with knowledge who've chosen to help us for reasons I don't fully understand but can partially infer. Lugalbanda moved to the edge of the bluff, looking down at his city with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent a century building toward this moment. I've ruled for 70 years. I've built this city with your guidance. I've created laws, established trade networks, and organized thousands of people into a functional society. And through it all, I've wondered, why? Why do beings like you care? What do beings who can do what you do gain from helping beings like us? The question Kronos had been avoiding for 6,000 years. The one that had no good answer because every answer revealed the uncomfortable truth: immortals gained purpose, meaning, relief from existential emptiness through intervention. They needed humans as much as humans needed them, perhaps more. Perhaps, Kronos said slowly, choosing words with the care of someone navigating a diplomatic minefield, helping others is its own reward. Perhaps beings with the capability find meaning in using that capability to benefit those with less. Perhaps. Lugalbanda's voice carried skepticism, suggesting that enhanced cognition made it hard to deceive. Or perhaps you're refugees who need us to need you. Who found themselves purposeless after some catastrophe I can't imagine, and seized on human development as a project to fill immortal emptiness. We provide you with meaning. You provide us with advancement. We're symbiotic. Neither is slave nor master, both species benefit from the relationship. That's surprisingly accurate, Kronos admitted, surprised into honesty by how precisely Lugalbanda had identified the dynamic. I'm enhanced. That's the point of enhancement, accurate thinking, even when accuracy reveals uncomfortable truths. Lugalbanda looked back at the city, at the evidence of human achievement enabled by immortal guidance. I don't resent what you've made me. I'm grateful for the century I've lived, the clarity I possess, and the capabilities you've given my bloodline. But I also recognize I'm not fully human anymore. I'm something between. And I wonder if that's your eventual goal, creating beings who bridge the gap. Who can partner with you as equals rather than worship you as gods? Would that trouble you? Being a bridge rather than purely human? It would fulfill me. Being caught between is lonely, not fully human, not remotely immortal, existing in an uncomfortable middle ground. But being a bridge serves a purpose. If I'm enhanced to create a connection between species, I can accept that. As long as the purpose is mutual benefit, not control disguised as help. Kronos looked at this extraordinary human, 100 years old, brilliant, perceptive enough to understand his own engineering. Lugalbanda represented everything they'd hoped to achieve through the enhancement project. Enhanced capability used for leadership. Longevity applied to civilization building. Intelligence directed toward creating stability that would outlast individual lifetimes. But he also represented everything they'd feared. A human smart enough to question. Strong enough to challenge. Old enough to accumulate evidence that didn't fit comfortable narratives about divine guidance and mortal achievement. The city will be complete in 3 years, Kronos said, redirecting toward practical matters, retreating from philosophical territory that led inevitably toward revelation he wasn't authorized to provide. Then you'll need to focus on administration. Keeping 10,000 people fed, healthy, organized, and functioning as an integrated society is challenging. Urban life creates problems villages never faced. Which is why you'll continue guiding me. Because I can't manage this alone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Lugalbanda's voice held acceptance rather than resentment, pragmatic recognition of his limitations despite enhanced capabilities. I'm not fully independent. But I'm more independent than I was. And my children will be more independent than I am. That's progress, even if it's slow. Even if full independence takes generations I won't live to see. That's wisdom. Most leaders don't recognize their own limitations. They believe capability equals complete competence, and assume authority means they should know everything. Most leaders haven't lived long enough to see themselves fail repeatedly. Age teaches humility. Watching yourself make mistakes across decades reveals that intelligence doesn't equal omniscience, that enhanced cognition doesn't prevent errors in judgment. Lugalbanda smiled with the self-awareness that a century of life had granted. Also paranoia, cynicism, and chronic joint pain. Enhancement helps with physical degradation but doesn't eliminate mortality's prices. They stood together watching the city rise, human hands building immortal designs, creating something neither species could achieve alone. Symbiosis, Lugalbanda had called it. Maybe he was right. Maybe the relationship wasn't control or partnership but something more complex, more tangled, more honest than either extreme. Or maybe it was still control, just better disguised through collaborative language and mutual benefit rhetoric. The question remained unanswered as the sun climbed higher, illuminating Uruk in the harsh light of morning. It revealed every carefully planned street, every precisely positioned building, and every evidence of design pretending to be spontaneous urban development. The administrative revolution. 3 months later, in a mud brick palace at Uruk Center, Lugalbanda faced a problem no village elder had ever encountered. The palace itself was modest compared to what later civilizations would build, a complex of interconnected rooms surrounding a central courtyard, walls plastered smooth and painted white to reflect heat, high windows allowing air circulation while maintaining privacy. The throne room where Lugalbanda conducted administrative business comfortably held perhaps 50 people, with low benches along the walls where officials and petitioners could sit during long sessions. Today's session had already lasted 6 hours, and the problems kept multiplying. The grain stores are insufficient for the projected population, his chief administrator reported. A man named Shulgi, 50 years old, was a baseline human who'd achieved his position through meticulous record-keeping and an uncanny ability to anticipate logistical problems before they became crises. He held clay tablets covered with calculations, grain inventory tallies that told the story of an impending shortage. We calculated storage based on the census showing 8,000 people. But trade has attracted migrants. Current population estimates place us at 10,000, possibly 11. We'll face shortages before next harvest unless immediate action is taken. Increase imports from surrounding villages, Lugalbanda said, the obvious solution that every village elder would have suggested. Villages are refusing. Shulgi's expression was grim. They say Uruk consumes too much while producing too little. They want better trade terms. Specifically, they want finished goods, pottery, metalwork, textiles, in exchange for grain, not just promises of future prosperity through urban development. Then produce more trade goods. Increase craftsmen's output. Craftsmen are demanding higher pay. Another administrator spoke up, a woman named Kubaba who managed craft guild relations. They see grain shortages coming. They want security. They're threatening to withhold production unless wages increase by 20%. Pay them more from temple stores. Priests are protesting. The temple administrator, a man named Ananatam, stepped forward with his own tablets. Temple grain is sacred, they say. This is set aside for religious festivals and offerings to the gods. Not for secular purposes like paying craftsmen wages. Lugalbanda felt the headache building behind his eyes, the familiar pressure of cascading problems that characterized urban administration. Village problems were simple: distribute food fairly, resolve interpersonal disputes, and organize seasonal labor for planting and harvest. Everyone knew everyone. Trust was direct. Reputation mattered because you'd see the same people daily for decades. Urban problems cascaded. Every solution created new complications. Fix one shortage, and it triggers 3 more demands. Solve one conflict, reveal 5 more contradictions embedded in the system. It was like trying to hold water in a basket woven from policies that had seemed sensible individually but conflicted when combined. You need institutional structures, Kronos said, materializing in the corner with the casual impossibility that Lugalbanda had stopped being startled by decades ago. I need divine intervention, Lugalbanda muttered, exhaustion making him less careful about admitting immortal assistance in front of his administrators. Same thing, apparently. Kronos moved to the clay tablets covered with administrative notes, his immortal consciousness processing the entire situation in seconds. Your problem is scale. Village governance functioned through personal relationships, everyone knew each other, trust was direct, and reputation mattered because social ties enforced accountability. But urban governance requires institutions. Systems that function independently of personal connection. I don't know how to build systems. Lugalbanda's admission felt like failure, but his century of life had taught him that admitting ignorance was the first step toward learning. That's why I'm here. Let me teach you. Kronos pulled out his own clay tablets, templates, organizational charts, bureaucratic structures that wouldn't be independently invented for millennia. First, separate functions. Food distribution. Craft production. Religious administration. Trade coordination. Each needs its own hierarchy, its own leadership, its own accountability systems. He began sketching organizational charts on fresh tablets, showing how different administrative functions could be separated yet coordinated. Food distribution. Create a department that manages grain stores, tracks consumption, coordinates imports, and distributes rations. Give it authority independent of religious oversight, but require it to report to you monthly. Appoint Shulgi as director, he's already doing most of this work informally. Craft production. Formalize the guild system Kubaba has been developing. Let craftsmen self-govern within parameters you set. They determine production schedules and quality standards. You determine overall output targets and trade allocations. Give them autonomy within structure. Religious administration. Separate temple economic functions from spiritual ones. Priests manage sacred rituals and festivals. A separate department manages temple lands, grain reserves, and labor allocation. Both report to you, but they don't interfere with each other's domains. Trade coordination. Create a department that manages external trade, negotiates with villages, coordinates caravan schedules, and maintains diplomatic relations with other cities. Someone who understands both commerce and politics, who can balance Uruk's needs against maintaining good relationships with trading partners. The organizational structures took shape across the tablets: hierarchies, reporting relationships, domains of authority, and accountability mechanisms. Everything needed to transform personal rule into institutional governance is present. That's complex, Lugalbanda said, studying the charts with a mixture of intimidation and excitement. Also terrifying. I'm implementing structures you're teaching me, but I don't fully understand the principles behind them. If something goes wrong, I won't know how to adapt. That's why I'll keep teaching. You'll learn principles gradually through implementation. And your administrators will document everything, creating institutional memory that persists beyond your lifetime. Kronos pulled up examples from previous civilizations he'd helped build, showing how similar systems had evolved. You're not just building governance for yourself, you're building templates that your successors will modify and improve. That's how institutions develop, through iteration across generations. My lifetime will be another 2 centuries, possibly 3. That's a long time for guidance dependency. It's a short time for civilization building. You're attempting something unprecedented, organizing 10,000 people in urban density, creating systems that have never existed before. That takes generations to perfect. You're just the first iteration. Your children will build on what you create. Their children will refine it further. Eventually, the system becomes self-sustaining. Lugalbanda studied the organizational templates with the analytical precision provided by enhanced cognition. How many cities have you built? The question landed heavily. Kronos had been careful never to mention his past, his experiences, or his true nature beyond a vague divine mystique. But Lugalbanda's intelligence made deception increasingly difficult. The enhanced mind recognized patterns that baseline humans missed, asked questions that exposed contradictions in concealment. Many, Kronos admitted carefully. In different places. At different times. Cities are patterns. Once you understand the pattern, the relationship between population density, resource management, governance complexity, and social stratification, you can apply it anywhere. The specific implementations vary based on local conditions, but underlying principles remain constant. Different places. Lugalbanda's voice was quiet, dangerous with implication. You mean different worlds? You're not the gods of Earth. You came from elsewhere. Refugees, like some of the scholars have been suggesting. Beings who fled some catastrophe I can't imagine and found us struggling to survive. Does that change anything? Kronos asked, genuine curiosity mixing with concern about how explicitly Lugalbanda was articulating truth. It makes you real. Not divine mystery wrapped in theological language, but beings who've seen things I can't conceive of. Who chose to help us even though we're not your people. Who've been teaching us while pretending it's inspiration rather than instruction. Lugalbanda looked up from the templates, his century-old eyes meeting Kronos's impossible gaze directly. That's more impressive than godhood. Gods are supposed to be mysterious and powerful, that's their nature, nothing remarkable about it. But beings who choose compassion across species boundaries, who provide help without requiring worship, who share knowledge without demanding submission, that's remarkable. That's worthy of respect in a way that divine power never could be. We haven't always been compassionate, Kronos said, feeling the need to provide honesty alongside the praise. We've made terrible mistakes. Caused millions of deaths through interventions that seemed necessary at the time but proved catastrophic. Created problems we're still trying to solve millennia later. Who hasn't? I've ruled for 70 years and made thousands of mistakes. Built systems that failed. Implemented policies that harmed people I was trying to help. Made decisions that seemed wise at the time but proved foolish in retrospect. Lugalbanda stood, moving to the window overlooking his city, seeing the evidence of both success and ongoing challenges spread before him. The measure isn't perfection, it's whether you learn from failure. Whether you adapt when evidence shows your approach isn't working. Whether you're willing to admit error and try differently. He turned back to Kronos. You're teaching me to build institutions. Can I teach you something? What could you possibly teach me? Kronos asked, genuinely curious what insight a century-old human could offer to a being with 8,000 years of experience. How to let go, how to accept that students eventually surpass teachers. How to recognize when guidance becomes dependency and dare to step back. Lugalbanda's voice was gentle but firm. You're brilliant at civilization building, I can see that in every street of this city, every system you've helped me create. But I think you're less comfortable with civilization maintaining itself. Because maintenance doesn't need you. And you need to be needed. The words struck deeper than Kronos expected. Because Lugalbanda was right. Immortals had built civilization after civilization, then struggled to withdraw when those civilizations became self-sustaining. They'd created dependency not because humans needed it, but because immortals did. Purpose through intervention. Meaning through being necessary. Existential validation through having beings who required their assistance. That's uncomfortably perceptive, Kronos said, the admission feeling like vulnerability he rarely allowed. I'm enhanced. Again, that's the point. Lugalbanda smiled with the same self-awareness he'd shown earlier. I don't resent your need to be needed. It's very human, actually. Or very mortal, I suppose, the desperate search for meaning in existence that extends beyond normal lifespans. But I think you'll be happier when you learn to find meaning in success rather than necessity. When you can celebrate human independence rather than fearing your own obsolescence. That's asking a lot. It's offering freedom. For both of us. Lugalbanda returned to the administrative templates, his practical nature reasserting after philosophical digression. Teach me everything. Make me capable enough that I don't need you. And then stay anyway, not because I need you, but because we choose a relationship over dependency. That's partnership. Everything else is just sophisticated control wearing collaborative language. Kronos left the palace hours later, carrying Lugalbanda's words like weights that shifted his understanding of everything he'd been doing for 6 millennia. The king was right about all of it. Immortals had been creating necessary students rather than capable partners. Building civilizations that required immortal maintenance rather than ones that could sustain themselves. They'd been afraid of obsolescence. So they'd engineered dependency and called it helping when it was really self-preservation disguised as altruism. The city rose around him, 10,000 humans living in organized density, creating something unprecedented in human history. All of it guided by immortal knowledge. All of it requires immortal maintenance. All of it is capable of independence if immortals dared to allow it. That was the real challenge of civilization building, Kronos realized. Not construction, but release. Not teaching, but trusting. Not creating dependency, but fostering capability. Lugalbanda understood that. An enhanced human had figured out what immortals couldn't admit to themselves. Maybe that was the point of enhancement all along. The writing crisis. In another region, 300 kilometers north in Anatolia, Sophia faced different problems. The symbols are multiplying too quickly, a scribe named Awan complained. The same Awan who'd taken the Enochian order oath 15 years ago, now serving openly as temple scribe while secretly preserving unencoded documentation of immortal intervention. She was 245 years old now, her enhanced longevity keeping her mind sharp even as her body showed the accumulated wear of 2.5 centuries. The scriptorium where she worked was a dedicated chamber in the temple complex, walls lined with shelves holding hundreds of clay tablets, each carefully catalogued and preserved. Morning light streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, settling on surfaces despite constant cleaning efforts. The smell of wet clay mixed with the acrid tang of fresh ink, creating the distinctive atmosphere of places where knowledge was preserved. Sophia sat across from Awan at a low table covered with writing samples, dozens of tablets showing cuneiform evolution across regions and time periods. The wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay had started simple, almost pictographic. Now they'd evolved into complex abstract symbols that bore little resemblance to the objects they represented. Last month, we had 347 distinct characters for cuneiform, Awan continued, her voice carrying the frustration of someone who'd spent decades trying to impose order on chaos. This month, 412. New symbols appearing weekly as scribes in different cities independently invent characters for concepts that previously had no written representation. By next year, we'll have thousands. No one can memorize that many symbols. The system is becoming unusable through its own success. Then create categories, Sophia suggested, the apparent solution that any systematizing mind would propose. Group-related concepts. Develop taxonomic organization rather than trying to memorize everything individually. That's what I've been trying to do. Awan's frustration broke through professional composure. I've created semantic categories, kinship terms, agricultural vocabulary, commercial terminology, religious concepts, and administrative language. Within each category, I've organized by subcategories, types of grain, types of tools, types of social relationships. I've built organizational frameworks that should make the system manageable. She pulled out tablets showing her classification system, elaborate hierarchies of meaning, symbols grouped by conceptual relationship, attempts to impose logical structure on organic linguistic evolution. But every time I establish categories, someone invents new symbols that don't fit. Some scribe in Uruk creates a character that means clay suitable for tablet making but not for pottery because they need that specificity in their inventory records. A merchant in Harappa invents a symbol meaning goods traded but not yet paid for because their accounting system requires that distinction. The system keeps expanding beyond organizational capacity. Sophia studied the classification frameworks with her immortal consciousness, which could process complexities that baseline humans struggled with. The problem was genuine. Writing systems needed standardization to function as communication tools, but standardization required authority to enforce, and authority meant control over intellectual evolution that should be organic. The problem, Awan continued, standing to pace the scriptorium with the restless energy of someone who'd been wrestling with this challenge for months, is that different scribes are inventing different symbols for the same concepts. Uruk's symbol for grain differs from yours version. Memphis uses completely different characters from Harappa. We're creating multiple writing systems simultaneously, all of them incompatible. A scribe trained in one city can't read documents from another city even though both are using cuneiform principles. Standardization, Sophia said, stating the solution that every centralized authority throughout history had eventually imposed. Choose one system, teach it widely, suppress alternatives. Suppress! Awan stopped pacing, turning to face Sophia with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern. You mean? Forbid people from inventing new symbols? Establish official characters and prevent innovation? I mean, establish conventions and encourage adherence. Make the standard system so widely used that alternatives become impractical. Sophia heard the control embedded in her suggestion, recognized the paternalistic impulse to impose order on organic development. If Uruk's symbols become the standard, taught in all scribal schools, used in official documents, required for trade contracts, then other systems will naturally die out through disuse. Awan looked troubled, her 2 centuries of life having taught her to recognize subtle authoritarianism. That feels like control. Who decides which symbols are standard? What if the suppressed systems were better, more intuitive, more efficient, more adaptable? We'd be eliminating innovations that might be superior just because they're not dominant. The eternal problem of systematization. Create standards, enable communication and coordination across distances. But standards required authority to establish and enforce. And authority required power to prevent deviation. Every system designed to help eventually became a tool for control, for limiting rather than enabling, for constraining rather than expanding possibilities. What do you recommend? Sophia asked, genuinely curious how a human, even an enhanced, centuries-old human, would solve a problem immortals had faced across countless civilizations. I don't know. That's why I'm asking the God of Wisdom. Awan's voice held slight mockery, the familiar tone of someone who'd been part of the Enochian order long enough to speak more freely with immortals than most humans would dare. Though I suspect you're not actually divine. You're too practical. Gods speak in mysteries and riddles. You speak in administrative solutions and engineering specifications. Another one recognizing the immortal nature. Enhanced bloodlines were too intelligent, too observant, too willing to question divine authority when questioning yielded better answers than faith. Every generation produced humans who saw through concealment, who refused to accept mystery when logic explained. If I weren't divine, Sophia said carefully, testing the boundaries of what she could acknowledge, would my suggestions be less valuable? They'd be more valuable because they'd come from experience rather than authority. Learned wisdom is better than inherited divinity. It's been tested, refined through trial and error, proven through success rather than asserted through power. Awan studied her face with the analytical precision that enhanced cognition provided. You're uncomfortable with this questioning. Why? If you're truly trying to help, shouldn't you welcome investigation? Truth-seeking should please beings who value truth. I welcome investigation. I'm uncomfortable with premature revelation. Sophia chose words with care, walking the line between honesty and concealment that characterized all immortal human interactions. There are contexts you're missing, histories you don't know, reasons for concealment that serve everyone's interests, including yours. Or reasons that serve your interests while pretending to serve ours, Awan challenged, her voice gentle but firm. Both, probably. Most choices serve multiple interests imperfectly. That's the nature of complex decisions, trade-offs between competing goods rather than clear distinctions between right and wrong. Awan smiled slightly, appreciation showing in her ancient eyes. That's the most honest thing you've ever told me. Not claiming pure motivation or universal benefit. Just acknowledging that your choices serve your purposes alongside, perhaps not even primarily, serving ours. I'm tired of pure motivations, Sophia admitted, the words escaping before she could reconsider whether such honesty was wise. After 6,000 years, everything is mixed. Every action serves multiple purposes. Every choice benefits some while harming others. Pretending otherwise is exhausting. The admission hung between them, more revealing than Sophia had intended. But looking at Awan's intelligent face, Awan who'd taken the order oath, who understood immortal nature, who worked to bridge species even as she questioned them, she felt the weight of millennia of careful deception pressing on every interaction. Maybe honesty, even partial honesty, was worth the risk of relief. 6,000 years, Awan repeated quietly, letting the number settle and processing the implications of time spans her enhanced longevity couldn't approach, despite living 2.5 centuries. So you're not just non-divine. You're ancient. A being who's watched species rise and fall, who's seen civilizations emerge and collapse, who's accumulated wisdom and mistakes across time periods I can't imagine. And I'm spending time teaching a scribe about writing systems, Sophia said, hearing the absurdity in her own voice. That's either remarkable dedication or desperate boredom. Both. Definitely both, Awan laughed, the sound carrying the relief of someone who'd suspected the truth for years and was finally having it acknowledged. So what does a 6,000-year-old being recommend about standardizing writing systems? Not as God, but as an experienced advisor who's presumably solved this problem before. They worked through the afternoon, developing standardization protocols that balanced consistency with flexibility. Sophia shared examples from other civilizations she guided, showing how writing systems evolved, how standardization could be achieved without suppressing beneficial innovation, and how institutions could maintain coherence while allowing adaptation. The solution they developed was characteristically complex, establish core symbols as standard while allowing regional variation in secondary characters. Create scribal schools that taught the standard system while documenting local innovations. Encourage trade and administrative communication to favor widely used symbols while not naturally forbidding alternatives. Let natural selection, rather than authoritarian decree, determine which systems survive. It's messy, Awan observed, studying their proposal. No clean lines of authority. No definitive answers about which symbols are correct. Just frameworks that encourage coordination while allowing variation. That's governance, Sophia said. Real governance, not the simplified versions gods allegedly provide. Messy, complicated, requiring constant adjustment, never fully resolved. But functional. Sustainable. More honest than imposed uniformity that pretends to serve everyone while really serving centralizing authority. And throughout the afternoon, Sophia felt the shift in their dynamic. Not God and worshipper. Not even teacher and student. Just two intelligent beings solving problems together, drawing on different experiences, creating something neither could achieve alone. Partnership, not dependency. Collaboration, not control. Exactly what Lugalbanda had described to Kronos. Maybe that was possible. Maybe immortals could transition from hidden controllers to acknowledged partners. Maybe revelation wouldn't destroy everything. Or maybe she was just exhausted enough to hope for impossible outcomes. The infrastructure problem. The aqueduct is failing. Zephyr stood knee-deep in cold water, examining the stone channel that carried water from distant springs to the growing settlement. The structure represented 3 years of planning and 2 years of construction, carefully graded channels carved through rock, stone walls built to contain flow, arched bridges carrying water over depressions and terrain. It had been beautiful when completed, an engineering marvel by human standards. Water flows 40 kilometers from mountain springs to the city center, supplying clean water to 10,000 people and reducing the disease risks associated with using river water downstream from agricultural runoff. Now it was cracking and literally falling apart after only 5 years of operation. Cracks spread through the mortar between stones, visible fractures that grew longer each week. Stones shifted under water pressure, causing gaps to open where careful fitting had created seamless walls. The flow rate had decreased by 30% as leaks developed, causing water to escape through gaps and create muddy marshes along the aqueduct path. "We built this 5 years ago," the chief engineer said. A man named Nimrod, 40 years old, talented but increasingly frustrated as structures he built according to divine guidance proved less durable than promised. "It should last centuries. You said the design was proven, the materials were adequate, and that following your specifications would create infrastructure serving multiple generations. But the water flow is too strong for the construction. The stones can't handle the pressure. We need better materials or a better design." Both, Zephyrus admitted, the word carrying the weight of acknowledgement he'd been avoiding. "The materials are adequate for the design I originally taught you. But you've increased flow to serve a larger population than we projected. Higher flow requires stronger infrastructure." When he designed the aqueduct, the settlement had numbered 4,000. Now it approached 12,000, and Nimrod had understandably increased the water flow to meet demand. But the original specifications couldn't handle the increased pressure. The infrastructure was failing because it had succeeded, growth had exceeded projections, and the system couldn't adapt. "Can you teach us to build stronger?" Nimrod asked, his tone carrying frustration that bordered on accusation. "Can you provide designs and materials that can handle actual conditions rather than theoretical projections?" "I can. But it requires knowledge you're not ready for. Concrete with specific aggregate compositions. Steel reinforcement. Engineering principles that assume capabilities you don't possess, metallurgical precision, mathematical calculations, testing methodologies." Zephyrus studied the cracking aqueduct, seeing the familiar pattern of immortal guidance creating dependency. "Teaching you those techniques now would create cascade problems. You'd apply concrete principles without understanding chemistry, which could lead to failures in other structures. You'd use steel reinforcement without understanding metallurgy, creating corrosion problems we'd spend decades solving. Then what do? Let the aqueduct fail? Return to carrying water manually from the river, accepting the disease risks, abandoning 10,000 people who've organized their lives around a reliable water supply." Zephyrus felt the trap closing. Repairs it himself using his immortal capabilities, proving humans couldn't maintain their own infrastructure. Or let it fail, demonstrating that immortal design systems collapse without immortal maintenance. Either choice confirmed the dependency that Lugalbanda had identified, that Sophia had acknowledged, that every immortal recognized but didn't know how to eliminate. "I'll repair it," he said finally, the decision feeling like defeat even as he made it. "Using techniques you can't replicate yet. Then I'll teach you maintenance protocols that extend its life until you develop the metallurgy to build better. It's not ideal. But it's practical. So we remain dependent on you," Nimrod said flatly, his voice carrying resignation rather than anger. "Unable to maintain our own infrastructure. Trapped using systems we can't fix when they break. Temporarily. Until your capabilities match your ambitions. Until your metallurgy and chemistry and mathematics develop enough that you can build infrastructure that doesn't require immortal maintenance." "How long is temporarily?" "Centuries, possibly. I'm sorry. I wish I could give you everything immediately, all the knowledge, all the capabilities, complete independence tomorrow. But knowledge without foundation is dangerous. You need to develop gradually, building capabilities layer by layer, each advance creating a foundation for the next." The engineer's expression hardened, frustration visible in his posture and tone. "That's what parents tell children. You'll understand when you're older. But we're not children. We're capable beings who built this entire settlement, organized thousands of people, and created a functional society. We're not too young to understand, you're just unwilling to teach completely. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Nimrod gestured at the failing aqueduct, at the evidence of infrastructure that couldn't be maintained by the people who built it. "You designed this system. You taught us construction techniques. You assured us it would work. But you didn't teach us the underlying principles that would let us adapt when conditions changed. That's not education, that's creating dependency. He moved along the aqueduct, pointing out specific failure points. If you taught us simpler techniques, we could actually manage lower flow rates, smaller scale, more conservative designs. We'd be independent. We could maintain our own infrastructure, solve our own problems, and adapt to changing conditions without requiring divine intervention. Instead, you gave us advanced systems we can't sustain, then act surprised when we can't function without you. The words landed like blows. Because Nimrod was right, immortals had built systems humans couldn't maintain, then expressed frustration when humans became dependent. They'd prioritized impressive achievements over sustainable ones. Teaching humans to reach beyond their capabilities, rather than perfecting the ones they already have, is essential. You're right, Zephyrus admitted, the words carrying the weight of 6,000 years of making this same mistake. I've been building for immediate benefit rather than long-term sustainability. Creating impressive structures that collapse when I leave because the people who built them can't maintain them without my continued involvement. You've done this before? Nimrod asked, hearing the admission embedded in Zephyrus's phrasing. Many times. On other worlds. In other civilizations. Building impressive infrastructure that requires immortal maintenance, creating dependency I didn't intend, leaving behind ruins when I finally withdraw. Zephyrus's voice carried the weight of repeated failure that experience hadn't eliminated. Experience doesn't eliminate flaws. It just makes you aware you're repeating them. I know I build unsustainably. I know I create dependency. But I keep doing it anyway because impressive failure seems better than modest success. After all, serving immediate needs feels more important than ensuring long-term independence. Then change, Nimrod said, his voice mixing challenge with opportunity. Stop building for impressiveness. Start building for sustainability. Accept that modest success is better than impressive failure, that infrastructure we can maintain is more valuable than marvels we can't. Zephyrus studied the cracking aqueduct, seeing not just failed infrastructure but failed philosophy. The belief that giving humans advanced capabilities serves them better than teaching them to develop capabilities naturally. The assumption that accelerating development justified creating dependency is flawed. The conviction that impressive achievement is validated, even when the means create unsustainable outcomes, is prevalent. I'll rebuild this one last time, he said, the decision feeling like a commitment to a different approach. But differently. Simpler. Using materials and techniques you actually possess. It'll be less efficient than the current design. Serve fewer people with lower flow rates. But it'll be yours. Maintainable without my intervention. Sustainable across generations. Why the change? Nimrod asked. What's different now that wasn't different 5 years ago when you designed the original system? I'm listening. Finally. To humans like you, like Lugalbanda in Uruk, like the scholars documenting our failures. Recognizing that impressive failure is still failure, that creating dependency, even with good intentions, is still control, that serving immediate needs while creating long-term problems isn't actually helping. Zephyrus met the engineer's eyes with honesty that felt uncomfortable but necessary. I'm trying to learn. Adapt. Build better. Even after 6,000 years of making the same mistakes, I'm still learning. Still trying to do right even though I keep getting it wrong. 6,000 years and you're still making mistakes. I'm immortal, not perfect. Those are very different things. They rebuilt the aqueduct together over the next 6 weeks. Not using immortal techniques that would have completed the work in days is a decision to use human methods that require human time. Simpler materials, locally quarried stone rather than imported marble. More conservative design, lower flow rates, gentler gradients, wider margins of safety. Smaller scale, serving 8,000 instead of 12,000, accepting that some would still use river water until the population justified building additional capacity. It was less efficient than what Zephyrus could have built. Less impressive than his original design. Less ambitious than what accelerated development made possible. But it was theirs. Maintainable by human knowledge. Independent of immortal intervention. A small step toward partnership rather than dependency. But a step nonetheless. The Civilization Council. 6 months after the aqueduct rebuilding, all 9 immortals gathered in council. The quantum network hummed with tension as they assessed the results of their civilization-building efforts. The council chamber beneath Göbekli Tepe felt different now. It is more crowded despite the same number of participants. The air is heavier with accumulated tension from months of parallel revelations, humans questioning more effectively, dependency becoming undeniable, the carefully constructed narrative of divine guidance cracking under the weight of evidence and enhanced human intelligence. We have 47 major urban centers now, Kronos reported, activating displays showing settlements across 6 continents. Total urban population, 1.2 million. Unprecedented density. Unprecedented organizational complexity. Unprecedented fragility. The map filled the chamber's central space, each city glowing with population data, infrastructure details, and administrative structures. Lines connected cities showing trade networks, knowledge transfer, and diplomatic relationships. The whole human civilization project is rendered visible in mathematical precision. Fragility, Erebus repeated, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose warnings about intervention failure were being validated with each passing decade. That's the key word. Every city requires immortal maintenance. Food systems are dependent on our agricultural guidance. Water infrastructure using our engineering. Administrative structures follow our organizational templates. Conflict resolution requires our mediation. We've created an urban civilization that can't sustain itself. Yet, Talia corrected, her voice carrying a defensive edge born from months of watching humans struggle with systems immortals had imposed. Can't sustain itself yet. But they're learning. Lugalbanda is developing administrative independence in Uruk. Awan is systematizing writing that will enable communication without our translation. Human engineers are rebuilding infrastructure sustainably in multiple regions. Progress is happening. Slowly. Too slowly. Ether pulled up demographic projections showing acceleration rates that weren't matching immortal withdrawal timelines. At current rates, cities won't be truly independent for another 1,000 years. Until then, we're trapped maintaining what we built. So we accelerate development, Prometheus suggested, the habitual response of someone who'd spent millennia teaching technology. Teach faster. Give them the knowledge needed to become independent sooner rather than perpetuating dependency through overly cautious guidance. That creates a cascade, Nix warned, her probability models showing familiar patterns of accelerated teaching producing unintended consequences. We've seen what happens when we accelerate too quickly. Bronze working crisis, knowledge spreading beyond understanding, creating dangers we spent decades containing. Enhancement project complications, genetic advantages compounding faster than social frameworks could accommodate. Every time we speed up development, we create new problems that require more intervention to solve. Then we're trapped in our own success, Sophia said, her afternoon with Awan having crystallized frustration she'd been accumulating for decades. Can't withdraw without collapse. Can't accelerate without a cascade. Can't maintain without increasing dependency. No good options available. There's one option, a voice said from the chamber's entrance. The council froze. Then, slowly, immortals solidified their avatars to full physical density rather than maintaining quantum projections because a human was in their council chamber, main clause needed. An enhanced human, yes, but human nonetheless. Standing in the sacred space where immortals made decisions about human futures without human input or consent. How did you? Kronos started, his voice mixing shock with growing recognition. You taught me to think. To observe. To question. Eventually, that thinking led here. Lugalbanda moved into the chamber's center, unafraid despite facing 9 immortal beings whose capabilities exceeded his comprehension. I've been tracking your quantum signatures for 3 years. Mapping where you disappear to when you leave human spaces. Following the patterns. The mathematics you taught me applied to problems you didn't anticipate I'd investigate. You're not as hidden as you think. This is a violation, Korath growled, his warrior nature responding to intrusion into private space. This is intelligence. Which you gave me. Enhanced cognition expressing exactly as designed. Lugalbanda's voice carried no apology, just matter-of-fact observation. Don't act surprised when enhanced humans enhance. You created these capabilities specifically to let us think at higher levels. Congratulations, it worked. Now deal with the consequences. He moved through the chamber, studying the holographic displays with analytical precision that revealed just how much he'd already deduced about immortal civilization building efforts. I came because you're debating our future without consulting us. That's a mistake. A governance mistake that creates exactly the dependency problems you're discussing. I can help you correct it. We don't need help from, Kronos started, but Lugalbanda interrupted with casual authority. From the beings you created? The enhanced humans you designed to bridge species? Yes, you do. His voice firm with conviction born from a century of ruling, of making decisions, of understanding governance in ways immortals had never fully grasped. You're trapped because you're thinking like controllers. Like beings managing subjects. But what if you thought like partners? Like beings collaborating with equals? They're not equals, Kronos said, the automatic response revealing assumptions embedded so deeply he couldn't recognize them. They're millennia behind us in knowledge, capability, experience. We're equals in authority over our own development, Lugalbanda interrupted, his enhanced cognition processing Kronos' objection and identifying its fatal flaw faster than the immortal could defend it. That's the equality that matters. You know more. You can do more. You've experienced more. None of that gives you the authority to decide our futures without our input. Knowledge doesn't equal right to control. Capability doesn't justify paternalism. Experience doesn't authorize dictatorship. The chamber fell silent. Because he was right. Immortals had been making decisions about humans without humans. Determining readiness for knowledge without consulting those deemed unready and building civilizations according to immortal templates without asking what civilizations humans wanted to build. Every instance of control they justified through superior knowledge, greater capability, accumulated experience, all of it collapsing under Lugalbanda's simple observation that authority over development belonged to those being developed, not those doing the developing. What do you want? Talia asked, her voice quiet but genuinely curious. Partnership. Honest partnership. Not you hiding while helping. Not us following blindly while thinking we're independent. Real collaboration where both species acknowledge the relationship, make decisions together, share responsibility for outcomes. Lugalbanda pulled up the displays showing urban centers, studying them with a practiced eye that recognized patterns immortals had embedded. You reveal yourselves. Admit what you've done, the intervention, the enhancement, the 6,000 years of guided development. Share knowledge openly rather than through careful management. And we work together, immortal experience combined with human innovation, to build civilizations that serve both species' needs. That's revelation, Kronos said, his voice carrying resistance born from council votes, established timelines, carefully constructed preparation plans. We voted to delay revelation for centuries. You voted. We didn't. That's the problem. Lugalbanda's voice held steel beneath a diplomatic tone. You're making decisions about us without us. That's not guidance, it's dictatorship. However benevolent you think it is, however good your intentions, however much you believe you're serving our interests, making choices for people without their consent is dictatorship. That's definitional. He moved to stand directly before Kronos, a century-old human facing an 8,000-year-old immortal without flinching. Premature revelation will cause chaos, Kronos started, the familiar argument about timing and readiness. Continued deception is causing chaos. Right now. In this moment. Lugalbanda's enhanced cognition processed faster than Kronos' defensive objections could form. Human scholars documenting your presence. Enhanced bloodlines are questioning their advantages. Cities are discovering they can't maintain the infrastructure they built. Documentation groups are preparing to publish findings that will trigger uncontrolled revelation. The chaos is already here. You're just not acknowledging it. Erebus leaned forward, his documentation consciousness recognizing validity in Lugalbanda's assessment. What do you propose? Specifically. Not philosophical principles but practical actions. Gradual mutual revelation over the next year. You start admitting who you are, not all at once in a single announcement, but progressively as humans ask questions. We start acknowledging what we figured out, not as accusations but as observations. Over 12 months, we have had honest conversations. Public ones. No more hiding. No more divine mystery. Just beings working together to solve problems. He activated one of the displays, which showed his own proposal, timeline, key messages, coordination protocols, and crisis management procedures, a fully developed plan for managed revelation that respected human agency while acknowledging immortal concerns. That's remarkably optimistic about human reactions, Kronos said, his skepticism clear. It's remarkably necessary, Lugalbanda corrected, using the same phrasing Enoch had used when founding the order. Because the alternative is violent revelation when deception finally collapses, and it will collapse. Humans are documenting too effectively and questioning too systematically. Getting too smart, thanks to your enhancement project. You created beings capable of discovering you. Now deal with the consequences by working with us instead of against us. The vote. The council debated for hours. Lugalbanda stayed throughout, contributing, arguing, demonstrating precisely the partnership he advocated. An enhanced human holding his own in an immortal debate. This proves that partnership was possible if immortals dared to attempt it. The vote came at sunset. Simple question: accept Lugalbanda's proposal for a year-long gradual mutual revelation, or maintain the current timeline of delayed disclosure. 5 immortals voted for gradual revelation: Prometheus, Sophia, Talia, Nyx, and Zephyrus. All saw the writing on the wall, recognizing that concealment was failing faster than preparation was succeeding. 3 voted for delayed revelation: Kronos, Korath, and Ether. Committed to the original timeline despite evidence that it was collapsing, believing humans needed more preparation, despite humans proving capable of handling complexity. 1 abstained, Erebus, whose vote for complete withdrawal 200 years ago had left him philosophically opposed to both options but practically accepting of the majority decision. 5 is the majority, Prometheus said, relief evident in his quantum signature. Revelation begins. 5 is a slim majority on the existential question, Kronos protested, his resistance persisting despite the democratic outcome. We need a stronger consensus for something this significant. We'll never get a stronger consensus, Talia said, frustration breaking through diplomatic phrasing. We barely got this. 5 for revelation, 3 for delay, 1 abstaining. That's as close to agreement as 9 immortals ever achieve. We accept majority rule, or we accept paralysis. Those are the options. Then we proceed, Nyx said, her mathematical consciousness already calculating implementation protocols. Lugalbanda's 1-year timeline. Gradual disclosure. Mutual revelation occurs when humans acknowledge their discoveries, while we acknowledge our intervention. Both species are facing each other honestly for the first time in 6,000 years. And if it fails? Kronos asked, voicing the fear they all felt. If the 73% catastrophe probability comes true despite the partnership attempt? Then we fail honestly. Together. Both species share responsibility for the outcome. Nyx's voice carried commitment despite uncertainty. That's better than failing while hiding. Better than a catastrophe happening while we maintain deception. Better than humans discovering we knew the dangers and stayed silent while they faced consequences blindly. She looked at Lugalbanda, standing among 9 immortals as if he belonged there, which perhaps he did, being the bridge they designed him to be. You wanted a partnership. You got it. Now the real work begins. We are building governance structures that haven't been attempted before. We are managing species-level challenges that destroyed our civilization. Facing trigger points that could end yours. All of it done together, with shared power and shared risk. We accept, Lugalbanda said, his voice carrying authority earned through a century of rule, the weight of representing not just himself but the humanity he'd been building cities for. The risk and the responsibility. Both. Then welcome to the partnership. Nyx's voice held something that might have been relief, terror, or hope tempered by probability calculations showing mostly catastrophic outcomes. Welcome to honest collaboration. Welcome to the uncertainty that comes from treating other species as equals rather than subjects. The council dispersed, immortals and humans together, already beginning to plan the revelation that would change everything. The probability landscape still showed catastrophic primarily futures. But pathways toward partnership existed now. Fragile, uncertain, requiring work neither species knew how to do. But existing. That was new. That was revolutionary. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. You're not gods. You're refugees. And you're building civilizations that require your maintenance because you're afraid of obsolescence. Lugalbanda stands in the hidden council chamber, speaking truth to the 9 immortals can't deny. He's right. They've been creating dependent students instead of capable partners. Building systems that collapse without immortal oversight. Engineering is a continued necessity because they're terrified of becoming irrelevant. Lugalbanda proposes a partnership. Real partnership. Humans and immortals are working together openly. Both species acknowledge what the relationship actually is. It's revolutionary. It's terrifying. And it might be the only path forward. But partnership requires honest accounting. Complete truth. Full confession of everything immortals have done and why. And while Lugalbanda advocates for transparency, the technological cascade is still accelerating beyond control. In Chapter 22, bronze weapons appear on battlefields. Humans apply every capability immortals taught to organized warfare. The cascade reaches critical mass. Prometheus admits what everyone knows: we've lost control. That's Chapter 21 of the First Awakening. Partnership or continued deception? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is AI Narratives and Tales, The Cascade Peaks in Chapter 22.